father had 4 daughters. Poor guy, he always looked for a son and never got one. And as the number 2 daughter, seemed like I got elected to help him with anything. I never learned the difference between a Phillips head and a slot screwdriver. It seems like I always knew. I think the first engine he and I rebuilt was when I was 7. So I always was kind of my father's son. Then I graduated from Lewis University. At that time it was Lewis College of Science and Technology at Lockport, Illinois, over at now called Romeoville. There were 3 of us women in the senior graduating class. And I met my husband, soon-to-be husband there, who was in their industrial arts aviation program, and he had the bug. He definitely had it. He was a year ahead of me. When he graduated, he went to work for a company in my hometown, got his private license on skis at DuPage Airport in Chicago in the wintertime, and we got married, and he talked to all the officers at those different bases that he went to, and he said, can I fly in there? And because it's so much travel time, and there's no public airports around. And they said, sure. So he bought a Cessna 140A, right wing, and traveled back and forth in that airplane. Well, I'd been riding with him and all the rest of it. So I thought, well, if he can do it, I can. So I got pregnant, and the doctor said, no, you can't fly, stay out of the airplanes, you can't go over 5,000 feet, blah, 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 blah. So my son was number 1 son, whom I happen to have taught how to fly, is still flying today, was born. I went to the doctors for my 6-week checkup, and I said, can I take flying lessons now? He said, oh God, yes. So I went from got OB's office to the airport and signed up for my first flight lesson in the 140 with my son asleep in the back seat of the car. And that's what happened every time I went for a lesson. My 6-week-old son, getting older, was asleep in the back seat of the car while I had my flying lesson. And then when I got my certificate, he was the first one I took for an airplane ride. We went to lunch in St. Augustine, Florida. The guy that ran the airport, we had a little airport, Hurlong Field outside Jacksonville, was a house built on the airport. And the guy that ran it was an ex-Navy chief, looked like Popeye. Okay, he had 3 daughters of his own, and we'd leave the windows down, and he and the mechanics would listen for my son. And if Dave woke up, he was a 4-hour kid, and I'd put him down at 10, and he wouldn't wake up till 2. My lesson was at 11. I was home by 12:30. Left him in the back of the car till his 2 o'clock meeting. But the guys would listen, and they'd call and say, hey, Esther, Dave's turning 2,000. That meant he was crying. I needed to get back home. So by the time I get there, they've taken his bottle, stuck it in the coffee pot to warm it up, changed his diaper, got it stuck in his mouth, and they're walking up and down feeding him, coochie, coochie, coo. Why did you call me back? Well, because we weren't sure we could get him to stop crying.
Here's evidence of your first solo flight.
That's right.
What do you remember from that day?
I ground looped. And I didn't get to land on the paved runway until the day that I soloed. Until the day I soloed, I landed on the grass because it saves tires and brakes, right? Because everybody knows that every student pilot that goes through an airplane goes through a set of brakes and tires. Well, El Cheapo said, no, you're not going to go through brakes and tires, you're going to land on the grass. So this day, now my instructor says, we're going to use the runway, I want you to do 3 touch and goes, and then we're done. I'll stand over here to the side with my arms crossed. If I want you, I'll wave you over. So I did the first 2, and I watched him, Brownie standing over there, and he's not waving at me, so I go for the 3rd one. Well, the crosswind came in on my 2nd approach, and when I touched down on the 2nd approach, I was drifting to the left, but he taught me how to use my rudders, so the airplane started to go to the left. I slammed in the right rudder, the airplane went around, flat, swapped ends, and I looked over, and he was looking at me, and I thought, okay, fine, I'm lined up with the runway, let's go. I came back and took 2 more approaches before I could get it on the ground, you know, because the wind died down, thank God. And I walked over and I said, well, you were supposed to tell me to stop. He said, I was stuck. I couldn't get my arms uncrossed. So that's why I did a flat ground, my first ground loop on my cell phone.
Okay, when you say your first ground loop, that means there may have been others. Let's don't go there. That's okay. I'm just messing with you. Okay, all right. So
You got my records. You know I never ground looped an airplane that broke. okay.
I know it, I'm just
You're
messing.
being a brat, I know.
I know. So, yeah, and you called him Brownie. That was a very affectionate name. His last name's
Going
Brown.
around, and retired Navy chief, the Navy Flying Club there at the airport, yep.
Okay, so, and then a 140 kind of looks like this, but I don't know.
Ours
if
wasn't
it's-
as pretty as that, but yeah, that one's all metal, yeah, that's a pretty.
And then here's a picture of it. When is this from?
Probably back in about 1970 or something like that. And that was when the Red Baroness was born. And the company, the Environmental Corporation Inc., built modular homes. And they sponsored me on the race, but they wanted me to do something to get all kinds of publicity. Well, with a name like Grupenhagen, let's call you the Red Baroness. And I was going to bring the scarf. I've got all of that. I can't wear the jodhpurs in the boots anymore because the jodhpurs come about this far. And the boots don't come up anymore either. But I still have the helmet and goggles in my scarf. I almost brought those today. I didn't, but I still have them.
No, you should. You should. All right, now I had to cut the corner off of these because I didn't want to rip up your thing when I scanned it there.
Oh,
So
God, no, don't rip my
yeah,
phone.
yeah, your file there. But this is a copy of your private pilot certificate. Okay.
It looks like that.
Got your commercial.
Yes. Yes.
What was the intention behind getting a commercial?
There was a lady at the airport who had a Stinson, and she got a commercial in her Stinson. Now that she can do it, so can I.
It was all about, oh, you are a pilot. It's all about braggadocio.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You had a seaplane, man. That was in a, I think if I remember, I went into a 172.
That was in a 172 in Seattle at Lake Washington, at Washington Water Service, whatever it's called up there now, I forget the name of it. The premier, the seaplane base on the west coast. Everybody from Alaska comes down to Lake Washington to get their seaplanes ratings. When my mom died, she left, there was an insurance policy. We got $12.61 a piece, my sisters and I. And so that was my money to spend every month, however I wanted to do it. And we were in Seattle, and I hadn't been doing a lot of flying because we did just come home from Sweden, which we didn't. Everything is so restricted there. It's all military. It's all run by the government. We didn't do a lot of flying there. So I had the itch. I had my 1261 that I had every month. So I decided, what am I going to do? I think I'll go get my seaplane rating. And I did it in a 172 on floats.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know you could put a 172 on floats, frankly.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, and then you got your flight instructor, which you keep current to this day.
Yes.
That was, and you're big in the Civil Air Patrol. I know that for a fact.
Yes.
And anyway, and you're also a Gold SEAL instructor. Okay. And
I've only had 2 students not pass their flight test.
oh, really? I got you beat. I only have 1.
Which I've been doing it longer than you have.
Well, I thought if you're going to brag, I'm going to brag
There
too.
you go.
Okay. So anyway, added multi-engine in your instrument ratings, and then you got your ATP. Now that was leading towards an airline job, right? Or no?
No. I race aircraft, and for the Powder Puff Derby, they would time the airplanes. And we had a measured course, 5.67 miles, between 2 piers off the coast out there in California. And in order to get a handicap for the air race, the girls would ask me to go out and time it, do 3 runs up and down to cancel out the wind and get a top speed at sea level for setting up handicaps. Well, one of the guys said, how do you do that? I said, well, you want to ride along? He said, sure. So I went out and showed him how we timed the airplanes to get handicaps. And he said, you know, you fly good enough to get your ATP. I said, oh, well, thank you. That's a nice thing to say to me. Oh, at the same time, the flight school where I was working got a 310 that we were using for Flight 135. And my boss said, you know, if you've got to pass a 135 check, our instructor will give you the extra instructions, and you got to do a 135 ride anyway. Why don't you just go ahead and get your ATP? So that's what I did.
Perfect. Yeah, that's good. All right. So and then you ended up flying the shorts at one point. You got a SD3 type rating.
Yep.
And I think that was for a company, was it not?
Yeah, that was Imperial Airlines.
Okay. And then you ended up flying from an American Eagle. That was for, what was the name of the?
Wings West.
Wings West. Wings West.
Yeah, out of San Luis Obispo.
Okay. And you got the SA227 certificate. Here's a picture of you with the airplane.
Yeah, that's the stop. I got the type in the Metroliner, and I got one in the Jetstream.
I had a tractor tire sandbox And I would play in that sandbox, pushing trucks and tractors around in the sand. One day I looked up and saw an airplane fly over, and I cleared off the hill that the tractor was climbing and made a runway. And I've been fascinated with things that fly ever since.
There you go.
Park students would fly directly over my house less than 500 feet. I was 2 houses from the runway.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. So you got the bug. You got the bug. So one particular day you saw this ad with this picture, and I believe the picture had a coupon with it, the ad did. And tell us about that day.
I'd been mowing lawns, and I had a crisp $5 bill, and I found that $5 certificate, hopped on my bicycle, rode to the airport, and took my first flying lesson. Loved it. Rode twice as fast home to tell my mother about it. That probably was not the order that it should have taken. But after they got over the shock, the next day Mom and Dad went back to the airport with me, met the instructor, and that's how I paid for my flying lessons.
Yeah, that's a great story. It is amazing to me that you were able to continue after telling Mom. So your solo came on August 14th, 1967, 16th birthday, right? Okay. All right. What was that day like?
Got my driver's license in the morning, drove to the airport late that afternoon. My instructor worked daytime, and after he got off work, the weather was perfect, made the first solo, and was quite proud to have a pretty little young lady standing next to the runway, of course, uncontrolled field. I mean, her toes were practically on the runway. Good thing I didn't knock her over.
Yep.
But she's been my co-pilot ever since.
Yeah. Okay. Is she here today?
Yes, she is.
Well, introduce her to us.
Sheila McDaniel.
Sheila.
My bride of about 48 years.
Okay. And who's sitting next to her?
That's my son, another Robert, not a junior. Chip, he's a Airbus captain for JetBlue. We gave him the bug, and he too soloed on his 16th birthday.
Okay, so he wasn't in a sandbox made out of a tractor.
No.
Okay. Very good. All right, so, and then you got your private 1 year to the day after that, pretty much?
On my 17th birthday.
Very good.
Actually, it was one day after my 17th birthday, because I went to take my check ride, and there was a cardinal smashed all over the runway, and the airport was closed. So I had to come back the next day to get my check ride.
Well, the Boston Red Sox must have been in town. Oh, not that kind of cardinal. Okay. All right. Let's see. So you worked here when you were in high school and college. This is part of your working your way through, right?
Yeah, about 2 weeks before my first solo, I was hanging over the airport fence, and a guy drove up in an old Willys Jeep and greasy coveralls and said, "Hey kid, I see you out here all the time. You want a job?" "Sure, what can I do?" "Oh, well, how old are you?" 15. "Oh, you gotta be 16 to work here." "Well, okay, you start tomorrow, but you don't get your paycheck until you turn 16. I was gassing planes one day. This pretty little tri-pacer taxied up to the gas pump. I was up on the ladder putting gas in it. And I looked down to the pilot and said, "Boy, it sure is a pretty little airplane." He looked up at me and growled, "If you think it's so pretty, why don't you buy it?" "Oh, I'm just a poor starving college student. I couldn't afford your airplane." "You'd be surprised." Turned out the airplane had about 28 days till annual, guaranteed it wouldn't pass annual inspection from the factory. He was going through a nasty divorce and was forced to pay the airplane, to sell the airplane. I went home that night and started doing some ciphering, talked to the bank the next day, and used the title for my car to finance a loan on the airplane. And that was my first airplane. I had a friend that was an A&P that had a tri-pacer, helped me recover it. 6 weeks later, and a ruined iron and a ruined pair of pinking shears, which she reminds me quite frequently. we had the airplane flying again. She tolerated a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Now, the thing that made me stop for a second is you said the thing wouldn't pass annual, but the guy was flying it anyway?
Had 28 more days on a valid A.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. All right. So then you joined the Air Force during the height of the Vietnam War.
Had a low draft number. My friends were getting out of high school and being handed a rifle and off to the Army. Gave them 25 years and really had some neat experiences.
Well, thanks for your service. All right. You were an Air Force instructor and examiner. Okay. All right. And whenever you got a chance, you'd swing by state.
Came home frequently. My in-laws still lived there, and came back to check on old friends at the airport. The runway was too short, couldn't take the T-38 in there, but I went to Scott. And before takeoff, I'd always call approach control and coordinate an approach to 30 at downtown airport with my requested missed approach instructions, which took me directly across the top of the Parks College campus, probably about 100 to 200 feet with full afterburner roar. Never got it.
I hear nothing. Yeah, well, I guess the FAA never got any complaints either. And then you flew the 141.
That was where I spent most of my career. Good airplane.
All right, who's this? The picture's kind of, he's standing too close to the flash, but you may recognize that as Bob Hope.
I was right place at the right time, and I was actually in Berlin on the 9th of November 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. Only U.S. airplane in that area. We watched the wall come down, and then were tasked to go up to Bonn and bring German Chancellor Helmut Kohl back to Berlin. And I was back 6 months later flying Bob Hope on the entire 1990 USO cast on a 3-week European tour, and also went to Moscow. There are some good deals out there.
You got the sweet ones.
There's always payback, though.
Okay, so this looks like this is this Afghanistan?
That's payback is what that is.
Yeah, that is payback.
That's Mogadishu, Somalia. I went across the beach behind the Marines and opened up the airport, and was the airport director and mayor of 23 nations' forces that were all gathered around the airport, taking sniper fire and trying to run the airport. Within 30 days, it was the busiest airport on the African continent, complete with FAA certified and flight checked approaches and mappings. So it went a long way. But yeah, that's one of those paybacks.
Okay, yeah, but you know, this ended up being on your resume when you went for the job to be the manager of the airport of the park.
That's true.
All right, so here we have an interesting picture. Here, I hear some laughing from up there. Is that Chip?
That's my son, Charleston, South Carolina. I was telling Phil the story earlier. We were stationed in Charleston when we got him started flying. He soloed on his 16th birthday. And then shortly after that, we were moved to Germany. He was able to continue his flight training over there. He was flying through a U.S. Army Aero Club. He was on the long solo cross country, flying across international borders solo, clearing customs, but he couldn't drive there. His mommy had to drive him to the airport.
Too funny, too funny. All right, and then this looks like a motley crew here. Who we got?
Young Eagles. they don't pay me to fly anymore, so I fly when the weather's good, and I love flying birds. I've flown about 600 so far.
That's excellent. Well, thanks for doing that as well. And this looks like this is another thing you put together, right?
That was about 200 Boy Scouts. The primary runway at downtown was closed, being widened. So we just took over the safety zone off the end of the runway and had about 200 scouts camping out there. And they all took Young Eagle flights the next day. Spent a lot of time with activities in the Greater St. Louis Air and Space Museum. Neat weekend.
Yeah, I've heard about how well that weekend went. That was good. You're also a published author?
Yeah, I wrote an autobiography and a few safety articles. It's just something I've always wanted to do, and finally found the time to do it a few years ago.
Well, is that available online?
It is.
Okay, well, we'll have to take a look at it. Also, you've got another article that you wrote here, because you're into this powered parachute craze, aren't you?
It's got a transponder. I'm flying legal. Yeah,
Well, while we're over here, the airworthiness guys are over there checking it out. So.
Okay. Yeah, for years I've flown powered parachutes off of downtown. I've kind of bought the farm and gone out to pasture, so I've moved it to Millstock now. But yeah, powered parachute's the best flying I've ever done.
That's cool. That's cool. And yeah, here's the back of your certificate, one of your certificates, with repairman light sport aircraft on it. So. And also, you went out and got your remote pilot certificate.
I did.
I think Esther had hers too. Yeah.
I don't do much of it, but my son has a little drone company and does some commercial ops. But it's nice that it opened up. One more thing to have on the resume.
That's right. That's right.
Don't need a medical for that, so when I get old and gray, I can still do that.
Yeah, there you go.